Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, salam. Welcome to MACFEST 2025. Today's event is about food. It's part of the one of the 9 mini festivals within MACFEST, the Ramadan Food Festival. And today we've got food stories from the Middle East. And in the title, you've noticed we've got Hello from Scotland. That's because one of our speakers is in Scotland at the moment. The other one is in the UK in London. I'm sitting in France, and the rest of the team is in the UK. So please share with in the chat, share with us where you're sitting, where you're watching us from. So today's event is also, I would say, part of the Women's Arts Festival because it will share stories of the different women, selected women. And so we've got the female creativity channeled into cuisine, into food. It's a fascinating event, and I hope you will stay with us until the end. Our host for today is Syirin Said. As some of you might already remember her from one of our previous events. She's a dynamic TV and podcast host, voice artist, and actress with a passion for storytelling in all its forms. She has produced short films and web series, using creative ways to share stories on sensitive topics, such as neurodiversity and mental health. And she's captivating the audiences with her voice. She's enjoying engaging conversations and shaping unique on-screen moments. And she thrives on creating content that resonates and inspires, like today. Welcome back, Syirin. Over to you.
Thank you, Katarzyna. That's a lovely introduction to myself. I'm just going through the chat, and it's so awesome to see that people are joining us from around the world. I have 2 attendees here from the US, which is fantastic. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining. This is really amazing. And also the UK, obviously. I would like to say to our Muslim audience, Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem. We're actually halfway through Ramadan right now. So yeah, Alhamdulillah. You know, it's funny how time goes super quickly. And I don't know about you before I introduce Zarina, but personally, I think, Zarina, this is going to be a question to you when we start speaking, that before Ramadan starts, there's always that feeling of nervousness as to whether, wow, Ramadan's back again. You know, we're going to have to start doing all these things. We can't eat, we can't drink for a certain number of hours. Can we do this? Can we do this? And then you start getting into the practice and you just get used to it to the point where towards the end, you don't actually want it to end because you feel that you've detoxed so much for, you know, towards making your body and your mental health better, as well as doing all these good deeds that you don't normally get the motivation to do during normal times. Anyways, I'm going to keep that as an introduction for myself. Thank you, Katarzyna, again. And I would like to introduce our guest, you know, my co-host, if you like, Zarina Ahmad, a PhD researcher in politics at the School of Social Sciences at the University of Manchester, who's going to be sharing stories about food from 10 different women who are all from different countries across the Middle East and North Africa region. Now, Zarina is based in Scotland. Scotland is such a beautiful part of the United Kingdom. I haven't spent enough time in Scotland, right? Zarina, in particular, you're currently living in Kilmarnock. I never been. I know the place, never been. So Zarina, over to you. Let's focus on that first. Or do you want to start with telling us how your Ramadan's going for you? And do you share the same sentiment as I do about prior to Ramadan and once we start to practice fasting in Ramadan? Over to you, Zarina.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me on. And hello to everybody that's joined online. It's lovely to hear from everybody. And I noticed there's somebody here from Vienna in Austria. And I've just come back from Vienna, Austria last night.
I went to Vienna too, sorry.
Were you there too?
Yeah, well, not recently, just I think in January, end of January. Such an incredible city. Sorry, carry
I
on.
love Vienna. I was there, yeah, I was there for work. So I was there just over the last 3 days. So Wednesday, I was there, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I'm just back from there. So welcome, listeners here from Vienna. Yeah, so Ramadan. Oh yeah, I love Ramadan. I'm probably all right, I'm not super religious in any way whatsoever, but when it comes to Ramadan, I just become a totally different Muslim. I just connect with my like my religion so much during Ramadan, and I don't know why, but it's just something that I just feel so privileged to be a part of and to be able to do. And like you said, it's so exciting. It's like the week before Ramadan is like you said, it's like, can we do it? Oh God, it's going to be so difficult. But yet there's an excitement about it as well. Like, yeah, well, this month is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. We can do it. And you give yourself that talk. And I kind of go through a cycle. And I'm probably at the low of that cycle right now because I always struggle in the middle. I kind of get to this point, like, first of all, I started off and I think, this is so easy. I could do this every day. And then I get to this, like, the middle bit where I just really start to flag. And I start to get, like, really, my energy gets really low. And I'm just thinking, it's never going to end. And then, like you said, then you come back up again. And then just before Eid, and you're just like, this is, like, great. This feels so good to do this. And we should just do this, And I always have this, what's the word I'm thinking about? Always have this intention to continue fasting throughout the year and not just keep it to Ramadan. But I never do. It's just like you have a New Year resolution and you keep these resolutions and you never do. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
You
that's
mentioned earlier.
my Ramadan journey is always interesting, and I always try not to overeat.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier to me when we had a call before with the event started that you are a nutritionist. Is that right?
No, I'm not a nutritionist at all. I'm not even a food scientist. I am just somebody who's passionate about culture, and sustainability is probably, like, environmental sustainability and climate change are probably my passion, but food justice is what drives me to do the work I do. So I do a lot of work around food justice and campaign for food justice. So when we think about food justice, what I mean about that is that everybody has a right to good quality, accessible and affordable food, to the point that I even think that, I might be a bit radical here, but I think that food should not be a commodity. It should just be a human right.
A necessity. Yeah. So just going back on that point, before we kick off with the conversation on the topic that we're going to be discussing today, I guess, it's related to Ramadan as well. Perhaps, when Ramadan comes, it gives people the opportunity, right, to evaluate the food that they're eating, drinking, consuming, because this whole world right now is about consumerism, right? It's like, people just want to buy things without thinking whether it's needed, it's all about want, right? So what's your thinking behind that? Does Ramadan actually give people the opportunity to kind of like take a step back and just, reevaluate their amount of consumption when it comes to food and drinks?
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Syirin. And I think I've got a slide as well. So I don't know if Steve could pop the slide about food justice and environmental sustainability. Just because I think it highlights just what you said, that it does give us time to reflect. It gives us time to reflect and think about, well, what is it that we're putting in our body? How much do we need to put into our body? Who has the affordability to have the same food that we all have? And I think for me, Ramadan is really very much about food poverty, food security. These terminologies, like a lot of politicians tend to use and policymakers tend to use. But I think as Muslims, we've always had that embedded in us through Ramadan. That reflection about, because Ramadan is not just, it's a time for us to reflect on what we eat, how much we eat, what we put in our bodies, but also like given to people that don't have, and sharing that food out and redistribution of that food. And redistribution of wealth as well, I suppose. During Ramadan, you have zakat as well. So thinking about food and also where our food comes from as well. And, I think it's really important. I mean, one of the the debates that I have ongoing with a lot of people is because I've always been a vegetarian and not eaten meat, but I'm not somebody that preaches and says that we should all not eat meat, because I think that's a choice that as human beings we should have. But what we should be is we should be aware of where our meat comes from, how we get that meat, and how much of that are we consuming, and do we need to consume as much? And if we look at Islamic principles around meat eating, I haven't got a slide on this one, but I just thought I'd touch on this one. But if we look at like Islamic principles around meat eating, I mean, if we were to follow the Quran and the Hadith, then, you know, it very clearly shows us that we should consume not frequently. You should only eat it, like, I think it's like once a week or twice a month. You know, if you follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you know, and if we follow those guidelines, meat is not a huge part of our diet. And also, when we are to kill an animal, first of all, we've got to breed it in a way that as if you're looking after your own child. Right, so it says
has to be ethical as
clearly,
well, right?
yeah, so it's very ethical, very organically, that the food that it eats should be of good quality, that when you're feeding your animal, it should be of good quality food. So it shouldn't, and it should be able to roam freely as well. It says all of these things in the Quran. And then also when you're killing the animal, that no other animal should hear it cry. So you are not putting harm on that animal or distressing it in any way whatsoever. So, you know, for me, Islamic principles around meat are just so strong. And so, you know, I just feel as if, you know, so I would never say to anybody, don't eat meat, but follow our Islamic principles around and guidelines around meat eating. And then maybe we would consume a lot less. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you know, we're all beings, right, together in this world. And there has to be that kind of respect, even when it comes to animals. You know, and also I think that the principles of, you know, one of the things I remember very clearly, and it's something that I kind of carry on as part of my daily life, is to when one of the sayings by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, when he says that, you know, it pains him to know that his neighbor is going hungry. You know, it's just a reminder for us to like not to be over consuming and not to forget those that's in need. And they could be someone who's living next to you or even living in the same space as you. So I think it's just a nice reminder to be less to not be selfish, be selfless, and just be a bit more mindful about, you know, food and the distribution of it, and how we can be fair in this world when it comes to consuming food, drinks, and anything else to just ensure that people in our community are well looked after. Now, let's start talking and moving on to our topic today, which is super interesting. And you've got some colorful slides to share with us, which is awesome. Okay, so you're going to be introducing 10 women you've selected to talk us through and share with us during this webinar. Why have you chose this 10 women?
Okay, so where did this project probably came from is probably the starting point.
Yeah, let's start with that.
So a lot of my work is done, like I said, is done around like environmental sustainability and food justice. And in these spaces, like whether it's academic spaces or whether it's policy-making spaces, one of the things that's disregarded is, or not highlighted, I probably maybe disregarded is too strong a word, but maybe highlighted, is the connection with culture, especially when we live in a multicultural world, and in the UK is very multicultural. People bring their different food cultures to the UK. So when we have like environmental policies or narratives that are like very one-sided, it doesn't always resonate with different people from different communities. So for me, we have to think about the lack of cultural and faith awarenesses in food practices, in environmental policies or environmental narratives, and decision making. So they have to be included. And then we have to think about, okay, the history of food as well, because when we live in the UK, we have to think about like things like extraction and exploitation that was caused by colonialism and capitalism, right? So a lot of food that like spices, for instance, somebody mentioned the Silk Road. The Silk Road is a renowned colonial way of extracting spices from around the world for the benefit of the West. So again, so thinking about that, and then the racial structures and systems that are normalized and stigmatized around what food is appropriate and what food is not appropriate. So for instance, when I was having a conversation with Kezra at the beginning, we talked about like maybe mangoes are a luxury that maybe we could give up and not import because of the carbon footprint and the sustainability issue. But then I reminded Kezra, but yet bananas are imported all year round. And yet it's okay for bananas to be important because we've normalized it. But yet mangoes, because they're much more culturally aligned to a specific culture or a specific ethnicity, it seems to be that then it becomes this luxury food that should be given up. So it's like, well, where do we call fairness in that? You know, where do we have that fairness? And those are things that are up for debates and up for discussions. And then also, when we come to the UK, working with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, there's this lack of connection to the land. So, and this came out really strongly from the 10 women that I interviewed for this Food Stories book, where they all had connection to the land. And that when I'm saying connection to the land, they understood where their food came from directly. It wasn't so as much commodified as it is in the West. So everything isn't always available in the supermarkets. You actually grow a lot of your own produce. And that could even be in small spaces. It doesn't even have to be like on a big farmland, but it can just be even like in your backyard that people would, it's just normal to grow. Whereas here it became very, I suppose, stigmatized in a way that and I remember as a child, when there was Asian houses, and we used to live like in a row of terraced houses, and the Asian houses had their coriander, their spinach, or that were growing, right? And then all the white counterparts had the beautiful roses and that manicured gardens. And you know, I used to feel really embarrassed, and it used to be like really embarrassing that we're growing fruit and veg. Why can't we get them from the shop like everybody else? You know? So in a way, it's like also thinking about, well, that idea of like what is normalized and what isn't normalized, and why was it normalized for some people and why isn't it normalized? And so what I mean by that is like, okay, like in the name of civilization, or in the same, or what is now colonial, what we recognize as being colonialized, but it was addressed as civilization. It made us forget about our connection to the land. And yeah, so this is where this project came about, and I worked with a community group that was from the Middle East, and from the Middle East, and again, it's like it's very easy to brushstroke a whole community as having one homogenized culture, and so I wanted to really highlight that you know, the Middle East is such a vast area, and even in one country itself, that there can be differences in food culture.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. That's actually one of my questions for you, but we'll get to that later on in this conversation. So just, you know, now that we've uncovered how you've identified the 10 different women you're going to be speaking about today, shall we start with understanding who they are? And
yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just go through each of the women with you, and you can just stop me at any point if you want to ask me any questions. But I'll go through like a little synopsis of each of the 4 stories from each of the women and who they are. And that'll cover who they are, where they're from, and what their dish was and why they chose that dish in their food story.
Yeah, and also if our audience would like to have questions along the way, they can just type it in the Q&A section. Right, Zarina.
Okay, so we'll start off with Basma and Maratab Haddad. They're 2 sisters, and they're from Kurdistan, and which is like, and the part of Kurdistan they're from is from the Iraq-Iran region. And for them, their food story relates to their journey when they were younger, crossing the border between Iraq and Iran. So during the Iraqi war, they were persecuted because they were Kurdish and they were persecuted. And Maratab and Basma's dad was half Iranian, and that was why they ended up going to Iran. And they took refuge in Iran. But their journey across was that they had to walk across for 3 days across the mountains. And when they were walking across the mountains, the way they were able to, I suppose, find resilience in that as children was to talk about their grandmother and talk about and their mum, because half the family went with the dad and half the family stayed with their mum. So Maratib and Basma went with their dad, and they were talking about like food and what their mum would cook or what their grandmother would cook. And that was what kept them going while they were walking across. So food became a really huge part of resistance and resilience for Basma and Maratib. And they also found an old cookbook. So because they weren't living with their mum, they lived with their dad for a while. They found an old cookbook, and that cookbook was what taught them how to cook and what to cook. So the recipe that they shared was kubba or kibba in some areas, but they called it kubba from Iraq, or fried stuffed balls, and it's bulgur or rice that is used to form the dough ball, and then it's stuffed with either vegetables or meat. In most cases, it's usually minced meat, and then it's fried. And then the other recipe that they shared was bulgur and vermicelli, and that is like a staple rice alternative to a rice dish. So it's cooked in a stock, and you can add many things to it. So it's like the base of many dishes. So you can eat it by itself with some yogurt. You could add lentils, you could add vegetables, and in most cases, a lot of people add chicken or meat to it. And this is for them is like, it's very traditional food, it's very homely cooking, it's what they feed their families with. And both Basma and Maratib are very fond cooks, and they love cooking. But I think the reason why they love cooking is because they love to feed. For them, it's their way of showing love to their family. And they really express their love to their family, their friends. They're very hospitable. And also, and I think coming from when, like what they said was when they were younger and not having food on this journey or having very little food, they really appreciate the food that they have now. So that was their story.
I'm sure.
So the next
Can I just say something?
Yes, sure.
You mentioned the bulgur and vermicelli recipe that they shared with you. Now, when I was younger, for the longest time, and excuse my ignorance, everybody, please apologize. I would like to apologize in advance, actually. I never associated vermicelli with Middle Eastern food. I always felt that that's exclusively for Asian, East Asian, especially Southeast Asian, right? With our noodles and all that in our dishes that, we mainly use vermicelli and, egg noodles and stuff. Until I kind of like, started to mix myself around with people from different cultures and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is something that I can identify with. This is kind of like my cooking. What's going on here? And I just realized it's actually vermicelli is quite a popular kind of ingredient in Middle Eastern cooking. It's not something that's unfamiliar. Right?
Yeah, it's very, very common. They have it in soup, they have it in rice dishes. So it's a very thin vermicelli, and then they break it up into small little bits. But it's like a staple. It's a household store cupboard staple in every Middle Eastern household. And similar to you, it's like before I was like much more culturally aware of different cultures, I thought it was very Italian. I didn't even know it was South Asian. I just thought, it's a pasta, it's a type of pasta. And the only time that I was familiar with it is that in like the Pakistani Indian culture, we have what we call semia. And so it's like a sweet dish that is made out of vermicelli, and you either have it with milk or you have it with syrup. And you have it on Eid quite often. So it's interesting because it's like, it was used in a very savory dishes, and it was just used to add bulk. It's used to add bulk to like rice and bulgur.
Interesting.
And also like a different texture as well when you're eating.
Right, that's the reason why now everything makes sense,
Yeah, and it absorbs the sauces really well, I think, as well as a cereal type of thing, because it's not quite a cereal, but as a pasta, it soaks up the sauces.
Right. Fantastic. Right, let's move on to the next lady or ladies you're going to be introducing.
Yeah. So the next one is Haneen. Haneen is from Algeria. And Haneen was a student that was here in Glasgow at the time. And Haneen made this lovely celebration semolina cake, right? And she made it in this like ring and then covered it with like dried fruits. So like lots of like nuts and sultanas, different sultanas as well. And she said it was something that, again, in her household, her mother, her grandmother, her aunts, that whose ever birthday it was or whatever celebration it was, this was the cake that they would make. Now, what was interesting about this was that it was the cooking techniques that were used. And when Hanan shared this recipe, because each of the women actually made the dishes in front of us, and she brought her own cooking utensil. So this was this pot, and you can see it in the picture. It's like a steamer, right? But it's a very traditional steamer, and it's got 2 layers to it, so that you steam the dried fruit in one layer and you steam the semolina in another layer. And she will not use like the more modern steamers, and she's young, she was only 22 herself,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But she wouldn't use like the bamboo steamers, or she wouldn't use the stainless steel steamer. No, she had to use the copper ones that her mother and her grandmother used. So she bought one over from Algeria.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it made me really appreciate like the different utensils and equipment that we use for cooking, and how they're also connected to culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so like, you know, just
And
like
then-
if you think about like couscous and tangines and, you know, the
Yeah.
beautiful pots that they used, and yeah.
And you're just wondering the different sort of like types of utensils used to cook, right? And you wonder, as much as you say it's culture and what they're used to, but what's the actual kind of like reasoning behind it? Do you know what I mean? Like, for example, we have this cake in a Malay culture, where you actually have to steam the rice because it's sticky rice. So there's a certain way of cooking sticky rice. You can't just put it in a normal kind of like cooking pot. It has to be a pot where, you know, it can actually steam enough, kind of, it can generate enough steam for it to actually steam the sticky rice. And it has to be that specific one. You know what I mean? So I guess, you know, this is like really interesting. So for Hanain to wanting to use this traditional kind of like cookware and bringing it over, I just find it like so fascinating. And it's something I don't really think about, if you know what I mean. Like these days,
Yeah,
we don't have much time in our day that we'll just take whatever that we have in our kitchen and make stuff and just cook and hoping for the best. Right. And then when things don't actually turn out the way they're supposed to be, you wonder why. And perhaps it's got something to do with the cookware that we're using.
yeah, and it is important, like you said, and it's like, why do people use different cookware? And like she said that she's tried using like different ones, and because it didn't work. You know, similar to like what you said, like the rice with the semolina has to be steamed in this way. And I think it's for her, it's also like it's also holding on to like her culture, being in somewhere different. At least like through her food culture, she can hold on to like that connection between her mum, her grandmother. For her, it was very much about this connection to like her relatives who aren't here because she was on her own as a student.
Yeah.
And then like getting the traditional utensils passed down to her sentimentally meant a lot as well.
Of course.
Yeah, so again, it's like highlights like how food is not just about sustenance and nutrition. It's actually so much more deeply rooted in our emotions as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Like certain smell reminds you of certain parts of your childhood, you know? And yeah, that gets me really emotional. Especially Ramadan, right, Zarina? I don't know about you, but especially when we go towards the end of Ramadan and we're approaching Eid and we're starting making all this traditional kind of like foods, right, for Eid. I don't know why it gets me every time. I'm sure it happens to everybody, you know. I start to thinking about my late grandmother, my late aunts, you know, my family, and how we were growing up doing certain things together. And it's sad, but at the same time, it's so rich when it comes to an emotional and memory experience. Do you know what I mean?
I totally get it, because I'm in our family, it's exactly the same. Even now, my daughter, who's probably like your age, and she gave me this list of things for Eid. And she said, Mum, can you make this because Nanny made this? Or can you do this? You know, and it was all like, and they were very traditional foods, you know, as well. And she like, and my children are always about like, you know, we have a lot of fusion in our food culture in our home. But when it comes to like you said, like there's certain times, like Eid is very much about bringing all that tradition back, and all that, like you said, that richness of like history and ancestrally, you know, it's there. And for me, that's so important in the work that I do, because when we think about like policymakers, it's so devoid. It's not
Right.
there, you know, it's so
Yeah.
like sterile of these
It's so
issues,
soulless.
so soulless, and food is full of soul, you
Yeah.
know, so can't, and I fight to keep that soul there. And it's
Yeah,
like, let's
please
not
keep
get,
going.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, keep up that fight.
And this is why it's like I'm like picking like these are like just 10 women that are giving their stories, and you know, are sharing that with us, and they're sharing it from their soul as well.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Who is our next lady?
So
Or
next lady is Farah.
Mm-hmm.
Farah, right.
I
So
recognize the foods. Yeah.
right. So do you recognize the food? Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
Farah is from Afghanistan and
Mhm.
Iran. So she was born in Afghanistan, fled Afghanistan, and spent most of her childhood in Iran, but still holds on to a lot of Afghani food, but also does a lot of fusion food. Right. So the bottom one is like, for us, from being a Pakistani background, it's very similar to an aloo prata,
Mhm.
but it's called bolani, and
Yeah.
it's potato stuffed flatbread. It's made slightly different. It's folded up the potato. The potato is not, yeah, it's in the middle, and you just do a very seasoned, but it's not very spicy, unlike like an aloo prata would be a bit more spicier. But it's really light and very nice. And so she made this for us, and then she made the chicken bread rolls, right? So this is like a fusion between a spring roll,
Yeah.
but she makes it with bread. So she just flattens out the bread and then stuffs it with chicken and then deep fries it, right? So I'd never seen that before, and I was like really fascinated. And she makes it all the time. But for Farah lives in a flat in Glasgow now, and for her, it's really important is about being able to grow your own produce. So because where she lived in Afghanistan and Iran, she goes that everybody had a small bit of land, and everyone used to grow their own vegetables, their own, like, you know, herbs, and everything was just accessible. So, you know, fresh produce was so accessible. She goes, here she finds it really difficult, but she's got a small balcony, and on that balcony she has lots of different herbs, and she has like chilies, and whatever she can grow, she will grow. And she makes us the most of the space she has, because she just feels that for her, like, a food would not be complete without fresh herbs.
You know, I would love to speak to Farah, because I'm not green-fingered at all. Every time I try to grow something, they never grow. They die. Even especially my indoor plants. I'm sure a lot of our audience can resonate with me. If you do, please share it in the chat, because I cannot help to look after plants at all. I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. I feed them, you know, and I always have this grand idea, right? Right. Next summer, I'm going to start growing carrots and my own vegetables, like what Farah's doing, right? And listening to you growing up, you know, I would love to just grow my own coriander, for example, because we use a lot of coriander in our cooking too, basil and stuff like that. And also I would love to grow lemongrass, because I use a lot of lemongrass in my cooking, you know, but they just never become fruitful at all. They just don't grow, you know.
You'll get there. You'll get there. You'll get there one day. I was the same as you. Everything used to die. And the last 2 years, I'm starting to become a little bit better.
Yeah.
And one of
Take practice.
my biggest mistake was overwatering.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too.
Yeah, and it wasn't, and it's not, right. Okay, I'll give you a little tip. So it's not about the water that you put into the pot. Is you've got to actually take the plant out of the pot, and then you water it, so the water can just go out, so it doesn't just stay in your vase thing.
Ah.
Yeah, that's what I was doing, because I thought I'm not watering it too much, but the water, there was nowhere for the water to drain, and it was just sitting, so it was sitting in stagnant water. So that might be what's killing it. So when you water them, you take them out, so that, and yeah, out of the vase, and then put them into your sink.
I clearly missed the vital steps. And Karen, since you resonate with me, I hope you kind of like heard what Zarina just shared, I think we're doing it wrong. We need to seriously think about how we,
so don't just water it like this straight into this pot. You have to take it out, water this, leave it in the sink, and then when it's dried up a little bit, and then you put it back into your pot.
Yeah, and not to overwater. Because we feel bad when you don't feed your plant every week. You know, you think like, oh my goodness, I'm starving my plants. And then you just realize actually you're flooding your plants. You're actually, you know, helping.
Or you let them sit in stagnant water like I was just letting them sit in this horrible stagnant smelly water, which was
I know. Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You learn.
So let's move on to our next lady. Who do we have?
We have Jumana. Right. So Jumana is from Iraq. Right. And Jumana's was really interesting because Jumana's been in the country for a number of years. So her children are like in their 20s now and they've grown up in the UK. And what I found really interesting from Jumana was Jumana turned around and said, oh yeah, so she's adapted a lot of her dishes and they've become a fusion of dishes, which is really common because I remember growing up, we've had a fusion in our diet. Everything's become, I would say, like currified, like we add spices to everything. So even if we're making pasta, there's going to be spices in it, you know. So so if we're making Italian pasta, you know, like a lasagna, that's going to be spices in it. Yeah. So I was really intrigued when Jumana said that, you know, like living in Scotland, she's like had a fusion of food, and I'm thinking, fusion with a Scottish diet. I wonder what that's going to be like. Really intrigued. And then she said, so she was sharing the kebab recipe, and she said, with the kebab recipe, she goes, and I'm going to add some chilies into this because this is where my fusion comes from. And I went, Scottish and chilies. And she goes, no, it doesn't come from the white Scottish people. It comes from the Indian, Pakistani, Scottish people that I've mixed with. So her fusion is from Indian and Pakistani culture, which I found really interesting. So she goes like, now all of her food, because in Iraq, they don't have too many chilies and hot chilies and spices. They have different spices. Yeah. For her, it was like adding chili to her food was her fusion.
Right.
And it was like how cross-culture. So it's not even the culture that you've adopted into or you've come into, but it's actually the other cultures that you meet and you blend those different food cultures. So that was interesting. So she made kebabs, which uses a lot of like different spices that she brings over herself from Iraq. So like different blends of spices. So for her, like spices, flavoring are really important. But again, she likes to have like freshly ground spices. So she'll go over to Iraq regularly. She gets all her ground spices. For her, she said like, you know, the pictures that you get off markets with all the different color spices and the smells and the aromas, for her, that's like her home. That's her, like her heaven, her place where she feels best joy. She's like seeing the different colors, seeing the different smells, seeing the heats of the spices. And she always goes back, gets the spices from there and brings them back home. So yeah, so with both her kebab and her aubergine dish, the tabzi bagunjan, for her, the spices, and also like, even though she said she likes to have fusion, she still also likes to like introduce some very traditional recipes and dishes to her family all the time because she's scared that she's going to lose them. She's here because she's been in the country for 30 years. She's got 2 sons, and for her, it's like she wants her sons to keep tasting these dishes because she says she doesn't know who they're going to marry and what they're, you know, she's got this like total fear of who they're going to marry, what kind of food are they going to eat? Are they going to eat well? You know, like a mother, are they ever going to eat well? Are they going to starve? Are they never going to have Iraqi food again? So for her, it's very important that she continues like, having very traditional food.
I think most moms feel the same way. I've got 2 boys as well. It worries me to know, you know, like who they're going to end up with. And if, you know what I mean? And if they're going to kind of like move away completely from our foods and our culture, because, you know, all of us, you know, we come from various different backgrounds and beautiful, rich cultures with incredible heritage. You know what I mean? So it's such a shame to not kind of like uphold it and ensure that it carries on for forever kind of thing. Just going back to what you said about your conversation with Jumana and her going to Iraq to get the spices and stuff, and how she described the, I would say, you know, spice bazaar, if you like, you know. I've been to a couple, and it's isn't it such a lively place, like to be in anywhere with a spice bazaar where they sell lots of different spices? It's just so fascinating, right? To think, where do they get all this different stuff together? How they lay them out? How do you know all of it? It's not just 10, we're talking about hundreds here, and
I know.
where do you even start when you get
and it's the different blends again. So like thinking of all like the different blends that you have, different blends of spices as well, and different varieties of chilies as well. It's not just one chili that, I mean, here you get hot or mild chili, now we're starting to get a Kashmiri chili in that mix, but it's also like, I think it's like the vibrancy of like the colors, the smells, and like you said, and it's not the same here in the UK. We just don't have that same.
Yeah, it's not a Western thing.
It's not a Western
thing.
because everything's pre-packaged and you can't.
Because we're so used to comfort, right, and convenience. Perhaps that is why.
Yeah.
At the same time, this is why, the whole thing about migration and immigration of different people to the West actually adds a lot of beautiful things into our livelihood. Do you know what I mean? It's actually a positive thing. I mean, like, just look at Mana and all the other lady stories so far about the different foods that they've kind of like recreated, and perhaps that was Mana creating a fusion of that, to create something incredible that people can share and also relate to. I think it's just a wonderful thing. Now, let's move on to our next lady.
So the next lady is Hanan, and Hanan is from Kuwait and Egypt. So her mum is from Kuwait and her dad is from Kuwait and her mum is from Egypt, and she's married to an Iraqi. Right.
Oh.
So,
the different nations.
Right. Yeah. So and there's like in the Middle East, there's very similar dishes right across the Middle East. So there's some dishes that are very common right across the Middle East, and the difference is the way you cook them. So the way you cook them, the spice blends that you use, the different spices that you use, and sometimes you might add a few extra ingredients into dishes. So again, for Hanan, it was always been a little bit confused for Hanan. It's like, well, what is my food culture? Because I have like an influence of Kuwaiti and Egyptian food. I'm married to an Iraqi, and he's got a big Iraqi family, so there's a lot a lot of Iraqi dishes that are brought into her home. But the dish that she shared was chicken makbous, and the chicken makbous, and she said that she makes it in a very Egyptian way because her mum was Egyptian, so she learned to make it in an Egyptian way. And again, so this is a blend of and it is very common not just in the Middle East, because it's a bit like a biryani as well. So it's a blend of like rice, and then you top it with chicken, and then you press, and then you cook it, steam cook it together. But you cook the rice first, you cook the chicken separately, and you put them together, and you cook, and then you eat it together. But yeah, so it's like a makbous, I think, means like pressed together. So that is like the term. So it is very much, and it comes out very much like a biryani for those that might be familiar with the biryani. But it just has different spices, and a lot of the spices that are used are things like cinnamon. Cinnamon's quite a big spice that's used a lot. So for her, so she was like just talking about the confusion, but also about like how like recipes are passed down generations. So for her, like from her mum's, like her grandmother from her mum's side, or her grandparents from her mum's side, passed her down the recipes that are much more traditionally cooked in an Egyptian way. And then from her dad's side, she has, like she said, like she has recipes that are passed down with Kuwaiti influence in them. And then her husband's family are always passing down recipes as well. So it's this, for her, it's very much about it being connected to like ancestral recipes, and that intergeneration connection. And for her, she tries to make them all very kind of unique in their own way, and tries not to fuse them, because she says for her it could be very easily, but she tries to make them very distinct, that this is a Kuwaiti dish I'm making today, and this is an Egyptian dish I'm making today. So yes, to honor the different cultures, she tries to honor all the different cultures that she has and tries not to make a fusion of them.
So a question sprang to mind based on your expertise and also the fact that, based on Hanan's dish. So you mentioned about like it's very similar to perhaps a Pakistani's chicken biryani, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, and I think this is a factual thing, that each dish, regardless of where it's from, originally were created based on the local kind of geographical kind of environment. Is that right?
Exactly. So yeah. So I mean, like if you look at like and if we just look at the Middle East, so the Middle East is like has an abundance of different types of food produce. So there's a lot of different types. There's meat. So usually it was like chicken and lamb or goat that was available around the Middle Eastern area. But also equally so, there's a lot of pulses. So like dried pulses were very common, and dried pulses like lentils, different types of lentils, chickpeas, and they also have longevity. So thinking about like when you can grow the pulses and then you can dry them out and then you can use them all year round. But they also had access to very like green plantation and vegetation. So a lot of fruit and vegetable were also grown in the Middle East. And then there's also the climate in the Middle East, and different parts of the Middle East would have cereals, so like wheat and bulgur, and also rice is grown in abundance. So the Middle East is probably, for me, if you think about it in terms of like an epicenter of a place, is like a place where you have an abundance of many different food produce. You also have seafood right around the coastal areas, where if you think about like if you're like somewhere, I'm going to just go extreme, like somewhere like Siberia. It's very, very cold. So you've got very little green vegetation. The only thing that you have access is to animals and animal fats. So your diet is mostly from whatever is around in your environment. But yeah, so the Middle East are very fortunate because they have so much. They have a rich food heritage there.
Isn't that fascinating though? To know.
It is, it's fascinating. And I forgot to say also like dairy. So dairy is in abundance as well. Like so they have like lots of yogurt, cheese-based foods in their diet.
And I think this is why sessions like this is so important, isn't it? To re-educate us, to remind us that, the food that you see in a restaurant or, the one that you're making at home, it's not just something that just came naturally together like that without any kind of like thought of reasoning why they came from a certain place or certain countries to start with. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's important to know that because it makes you appreciate each dishes better and also enjoying your food better. Okay, let's move on to your next lady, Zarina, please.
So next lady is Fawzia, I believe. Next slide, please. Next slide. That's the one. Thank you. So Fawzia is from Lebanon, and Fawzia made a dish called malakia, which is the English equivalent is called mallow, but people call it Lebanese spinach or Egyptian spinach. And there's like this debate about where it originated from. So there's an Egyptian version of malakia, and there's also a Lebanese Syrian version of malakia.
And we do see this a lot, don't we? Because they're so close to each other in a way, geographically.
Yeah, they are very close to each other. Yeah. And there is this always constant debate, especially around something like hummus. Where does hummus come from? Where did it originate? Because everyone wants to claim the hummus. The malakia.
I would like to claim that I made the hummus. Because it's such a great kind of thing to have every time.
Yeah. So for Fawzia, malakia was a dish that she wanted to introduce us. So it's similar to spinach, but it's very different at the same time to spinach, and it's a very I don't even know how to describe it. It's that you have to wash it a lot because it has this like stringiness and jelly dust to it out of the water. The water, like when it was, when you clean it out, it's like the water becomes this like jelly glutinous type of water, and you have to take that out and you have to wash it all out. And So she introduced us to this, and then obviously patata harara, which is a very common side dish in Lebanon, and you have it with everything. It's a bit like falafel or hummus, that you have it, you know, like every dish it'll be there as a side dish, rather than having like rice. So they'll have like a lot of flatbreads in Lebanon, and they'll also have like patata hararas as a side dish to this. And what was interesting about this dish was that it was the Malachia's growing season. So for her, it's very much that it's a seasonal dish, and it's only eaten in Lebanon during a particular season when it's harvested. And she actually goes back, like in the summers, and she goes back to her land where her parents' land is, and she harvests it herself, and then she packs it and brings it back to the UK.
That's amazing.
So she she either freeze dries it, or she'll like pack it and then she'll freeze it when she comes back to the UK.
Wow.
So yeah, so she has like these bundles of Malachia that she brings back in her suitcase.
Yeah, and I just heat it out.
And then what she does is she just takes it out of the freezer, and then she just uses it as she needs during the year. But she puts it, it's like from her childhood, and she's just like, it's something that she would just never give up.
That's incredible.
And she goes to the effort of like, you know, if she doesn't get to Lebanon, you know, that summer, somebody will, a relative or a friend will, and they'll always bring, this is Malachia, is one thing that they'll all bring back for each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you're starting to get it more and more, a little bit more in the UK, but it's not that common. It's known as like mallow as well. So if anyone's ever looking for it, it's known as mallow. But
mallow. How do you spell it?
Just like marshmallow, but just without the marsh.
MALLOW?
Yeah, and sometimes it's known as the Jewish mallow or Jews mallow.
Okay.
But yeah.
That's cool. Wow.
Yeah,
Right,
and so they have different varieties of spinach.
sorry.
I was just going to say they have different varieties of spinach in Egypt and in Lebanon and Syria. But Malachia is like the king of their greens.
Right. It's the most famous one that they tend to go for.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I just love the fact that, you know, she kind of like harvest the
Yeah, and for me it resonates like with when we talk about like seasonal food, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, for her this very much a seasonal food. They go out, she harvests it, she brings it back, and she keeps it.
Love it. Love that story. Now our next lady is our lady number 7. Am I right?
That's right. Well, it's number 7 full story, but it's number 8 because Basma and Maratib are together. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right, so Miriam is also from Algeria, but she's from northern Algeria.
Oh.
And for Miriam's food story, she shared us this okra and lamb stew. And again, lamb is very, like you said, is something that is in that region is very available. So it was what was eaten, and okra is something that's it's grown as well. So it's very regional food for her. And then the flatbread is a bread that's made out of semolina flour rather than wheat flour. And then it's dipped into the stew.
Right.
And for her, this is like very traditional food, and it's very traditional. But the reason why Miriam wanted to highlight this was like she feels so passionate that when she's in the UK, you know, very little is known about Algeria, you know, and there's this whole hostility towards Algeria in terms of like Algeria is not a place to, you know, go and visit, so it's not on the tourist map. And she goes, well, if people don't go and visit it, and you know, and people don't know a lot about it, so for her, she wanted to really share that with the wider world through her food.
Fantastic idea.
So for her, it's like if I can share even like one recipe with the world and share what my culture is about, and to you know, to see that there's a lot more in Algeria, and you know, and people are welcome to Algeria. For her, it was just like, you know, she could be on a tourist ad the way she was speaking about Algeria. It was just like, I'm thinking, you could work for the tourist agency about Algeria. But for her, it was so important that people knew about Algeria and they knew about the food culture there. And and for her, that was why she wanted to highlight this recipe, a very traditional, very homely recipe.
I'm just interested to know more about the flatbread, you know, and all the different breads that's available across the Middle East, isn't it? Like just fascinating, you know, they're all so different, yet, you know, you can kind of like, they're also different, yet there's also that sense of familiarity and similarity, you know, just
Yeah.
like Indian breads, I guess, as well, like naan.
Yeah, so because then you have like your flat breads, you have your softer breads, you have your like this one's like a bit of a denser bread, and then you have your leavened breads that have like yeast added to it. So yeah,
Yeah.
they're a bit more airy. And it's like bread is just I mean I could do a whole research around bread. I would love to do a whole research around bread, know
You
all the
should.
different breads. And it's also like the different spices that people add, the herbs, the different things that they, because this one they add a lot of like poppy seeds in or sesame seeds into this one.
Mhm.
And then you have like in Lebanon, you have in Lebanon, Syria and Palestine, where you have like your za'atar bread. So bread
Yeah,
that has like za'atar spices
exactly.
on top of it, and they
Yeah.
have it just for breakfast in the morning. It's the best thing ever. It's like so tasty.
Yeah.
You know, there's
And
nothing like freshly baked bread, is there?
yeah, and the different methods used to make these breads. I mean, making bread, it's not an easy process at all.
Yeah, and even with this one was Miriam, and like Miriam had 3 attempts before
Yeah,
she
I'm
got
sure.
to this level, and she was so disappointed because like the first time it burned, and then the
Oh,
second time I don't know what happened, and then and then the third time was perfect. Yeah,
oh,
but
wonderful.
like you said, it does take a lot of effort and a lot of skill as well. I mean, you
Yes,
think
I'm
bread's so
saying
simple, but
methods,
it's
skills.
a lot
Yeah,
of
you have to
skill.
be an expert. It's always never, it's almost always never the first attempt. Do you know what I mean? It's always
Yeah.
like, okay, this is not going to happen. I have to try again, kind of thing, you know, but never give up. That's the key. Just like our
That
plan,
never give up. I
like
know.
our
Or
plan.
even it's just like, even if and the dough might be right, it might not be right for the very first, like when I sometimes make chapatis, obviously the first one's my experiment one. And then after that one, they'll be fine.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, or
exactly.
pancakes. So even when I'm making pancakes, the first one's my experiment one, then the rest will be fine.
Yeah, always the case. Now, Noura, is Noura our final lady that we're going to be speaking
No,
about?
Noura's the second last.
Second penultimate,
So
right? Let's
Noura's
go
the
to
second
Noura
last
then.
one. So Noura is from Kuwait and Iraq.
Mhm.
And again, like this idea of like fusion food, and like dolmas are like renowned across the Middle East, right?
Mm.
And what Noura wanted to share with us about her specific recipe, and she says why it differs from region to region, is in the stuffing, but also the quality of the vine leaves. So the vine leaves differ from region to region as well. And then sauces that you serve it in. So you actually, and I didn't realize this, but because they're usually just dry, not dry, but they're not served in a sauce. But in order to cook them, you actually saute them in a sauce, the vine leaves. And
Mm.
that sauce that you saute them in is how they absorb all the different flavors. So you like kind of steam them in this sauce. And so for her, it was like, this is like her traditional recipe from her Iraqi background, is what she shared.
Can I just ask you a quick question? I'm not sure if you have the answer for it. I'm pretty sure you know a lot more than me. But dolma, right? The stuffed vine leaves with rice. It's rice, isn't it?
It can be rice. Well, it's rice. It's usually rice, but it can be rice with meat as well. Rice
Right.
and
Yeah.
meat together.
Yeah. I remember my friend, who's Turkish, coming to my house for eat one day, and she brought exactly the similar thing. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting. You know, what is this? And then she explained to me, and I was like, how long did it take you to make these? You know, she goes, oh, it's easy. Once you know how to make it, it doesn't cost me any time. And then now you're sharing with me that it's also available in, you know, in Iraqi and Kuwaiti cultures as well. So I'm just wondering, like, how different or how similar the versions between, you know, what Noura made and what my Turkish friend made. Do you
Yeah.
do you know?
It's dolma is very common right across the Middle East, and it comes from because of the vine leaves, I think. It's like a way of using the vine leaves. So the
Right.
vine leaves were used for like I suppose traditionally to cook the rice in, and it was a way, but then what came from that was that the actual leaves were very tender and very tasty. So that's where, and it's so quite cross. And I suppose it's like the taste of the leaves vary as well. So the
Hmm.
vine leaves, so some are a bit more bitter and some are a bit more sweeter leaves. Some are a bit more harder and some are a bit more softer. So the quality of the leaves or the different varieties of the leaves give a different taste to your dolma as well. And then again, the spices the sauce that you like saute it in also adds the different flavors.
Okay,
So
that's
region by region, you'll have different varieties of it, and
right.
it can
Yeah.
taste like a different dish. It can taste
They
like a
look the
different
same,
dish.
but they taste different.
They taste
Yeah.
different, yeah.
Yeah.
They look the same, but they taste very different.
That's
And I
good.
remember my Egyptian friend, she made them, and hers were very vinegary. Probably
Right.
they had a very vinegary taste to them. And
Mm.
whereas these ones, when I had them, they had a very much more sweeter, tomatoey taste to them.
Mm.
Yeah.
I cannot describe to you what the version that my Turkish friend made. I have to revisit that, or perhaps
Yeah.
make more of this eat.
Yeah.
I
And my
know.
Egyptian friend, when she made them, they were much more firmer, and there was much more of a bite to the vine leaf. And when Noura made them, it was much more softer. They just
Right.
melted much more in your mouth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
All
yeah.
right. So next.
And then she made, oh yeah, so the interesting
Sorry.
thing about this one
Exactly.
was oh yeah, so it was the deep fried pastries, right, which is
Mm.
like churro, which I was like really
Really? It
surprised
looks
at.
like churros.
It
Yeah.
looks like churros, but they're different, right? But what was interesting was the reason why she makes these dishes, and like any of the dishes that she uses, Noura was like saying that she likes to cook from scratch. But for her, it's like because she's got 3 young children, and for her it's always about, well, whatever's in the store cupboard, right? Right, that
Sounds
comes out.
familiar.
Like vine leaves are always in the store cupboard, rice is always in the store cupboard, like flour is always in the store cupboard, sugar's in the store cupboard, you know, so she's always about store cupboard ingredients. So she's always got a stock. So she goes that she makes sure that she's never out of like store cupboard ingredients. So
Yeah.
that if anyone turns up, there's always something to cook, right? So that for her, that's really important. But the churro recipe, right? So
Yes.
you, and again, it goes back to traditional utensils, right? So she used to have a piping utensil from Iraq, right? And it broke, right?
Oh,
Her
no.
husband, who likes to cook with her husband does a lot of the cooking, he went to B&Q and he got one of those silicone guns, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So he got one of those silicone guns, you know, the ones that you like long tube. That's it. So he's
That's
adapted a
terrific.
silicone gun to make her churros things. Her
Wow.
yeah.
Well done.
Right. So I
That's
just wanted
thinking
to share
outside the
that,
box,
which was
I
I
guess.
found so
Yeah.
fascinating. And she goes, yeah, because her husband's like an engineer. So she goes, well, it
Wow.
became useful because this is what he came up with, this invention. So now he makes them all the time. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah.
That's really cool.
And the last one is
The
from
last lady,
Dora.
yes, our last lady.
Right. So Dora. So Dora is probably probably my favorite story,
Yeah.
right? So first of all, she made makluba. Makluba is a very famous dish from the Middle East. It's sometimes known as the upside down dish, and again it comes from Jerusalem, right? And this is very important that I state this because it does come from Jerusalem, and it came from, there's a history behind this dish. So there was an emperor that visited Jerusalem at the time, visited another emperor, right? And when he came, the chef had made this dish, and the chef had just made up a dish, right? That he made this dish up where he put, similar to the other one, similar to the biryani makbous, but he used different vegetables as well to make it a bit more ornate, right?
Yeah.
So he laid it up a bit, and then he turned it upside down. And this emperor who didn't know the name of the dish really liked it, so he referred it to the upside down dish, and that's where the name maklubik comes from, right? And now, so Dora and Dora's husband, they're both Palestinian activists, and they say that this is really important, that the history of food and where the food comes from is so important, because for them, food is a form of resistance, right? So reclaiming, not just reclaiming, but actually holding on to their food history and their food culture so that it isn't taken over by Israel is really important.
I
So
understand
yeah.
that. And it's also their identity, right? I
It's
think
part of that
Mm.
identity,
Yeah.
and like where dishes
So
come
important.
from, and how
Yeah.
they came about is, you have to acknowledge this. For them, this is really important. So
Mm.
this is the McClobe dish, and then the other one was a Hilbert.
Wait, I just want to hold you on to the
Yeah.
microwave dish, because this is the thing. Because of there's a lot going on in the world right now, as we know, but because of what's happening, people can identify. The moment you see someone tipping over a pot, that's a Palestinian food. That's a Palestinian dish. And that's maklube. I didn't really know the name of it, but now right?
Yeah.
It's literally that. It's that simple kind of like gesture with the, serving the food or how the food's made. It's automatically we know it's Palestinian. So yeah, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and it's for them, it's like all the Palestinian dishes. They they really want to make sure that the world knows that these are Palestinian dishes.
Yeah, of
And
course.
there's a history behind them. And so, like, just talking about the history. So in Palestine, so like during the harvesting season, the olives, because olives are like in abundance in Palestine, right?
Yes.
And so during the harvesting period, olives are like a sacred fruit there as well. And it is like every season, like even up to very recently, that every season it was a holiday season, and it was a holiday season because everyone went back to their farmlands. So people in the cities, or people that were at university, so even university professors would get this holiday because everybody was connected to the land, right? So everybody had like their ancestral farmland, and they would go back and they would go help to harvest. And that's like for them, for me, that connection to the land is what is so missing in our food culture in the West, unfortunately. We just don't have that. And for them, it's just so important, that connection to the land, and understanding and appreciating and valuing where our food actually comes from. It was so deep rooted in the conversations that I had with Dora and Dora's husband, why they were very, very passionate about people knowing about, these traditions and where food comes from. And obviously for the Palestinian, land is so important, but it's also about like, well, why is the land so important?
It's rich in a lot of things, isn't it?
It was so rich. And this is why like I love this project, because it was just so rich, and like you said, like on so many different dimensions, so many different layers.
And open up your eyes as well to, like, perhaps the different struggles, the different kind of like successes, and that intertwines, and it's kind of like manifests through their food and their culture, because it's part of their heritage and their identity, which I think is really, really important. I'm just very, very intrigued with this cake with fenugreek. I will never, ever, ever use fenugreek in any of my desserts, but please.
Yeah, I was exactly the same. I was exactly the same as you. I was like, and fenugreek has got very distinct aromatic.
Yes,
taste.
and it lingers.
And it lingers out your pores and everything. Yeah. So I was just like fascinated with this, and I was like very skeptical, and I didn't really want to try it, but it is so tasty, and it's made out of fenugreek seeds. And what you have to do is you have to soak the fenugreek seeds overnight and drain the water, and then you have to soak them and boil them and the seeds again, and then you take that bitterness out of them, and then you add them into the cake. And you add them with semolina, and you add them with wheat flour. So it's a mixture of different flours. But it has this very aromatic, but very soft and subtle aromatic taste to it, which is, it's very slightly fenugreeky, but not overpowering at all. And it was very delicious. It was lovely. And one of the things that I learned, like, throughout all of these, there was the sweet dishes that a lot of people used, and it was about like a lot of Middle Easterns use syrup
Yes,
and their cooking and their sweet dishes, and they pour syrup on. And it's about, what they said is like, so even like the churro recipe, or there's like the other one, babusla recipe, there's different ways. You have to have, like, one of the dishes has to be cold and one has to be hot. So if you've got a hot cake, then the syrup has to be cold. And if you've got a cold cake, then the syrup has to be hot. But you can't do both, because it just doesn't work then. So you can't have hot and hot. So you can't have hot syrup on top of a hot cake.
I have to reach out to some of my Palestinian friends to find out where I can try hilbeh. I'm very, very intrigued now.
I can send you the recipe over and you can make it yourself.
Maybe I can try and make it. I mean, with caution as well. Like, use as little fenugreek as possible. Maybe. Then I would spoil the recipe. I don't want to do that. I'll try it. Send me the recipe. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to send you the recipes. And that's a very interesting point, right? Because
Yeah.
so talking about recipes, because this is a full storybook, right? And when I was making this book up this is in partnership with the University of Glasgow, and the other researcher that was involved on it found this book very difficult because they kept thinking of it as a recipe book. Because we do obviously want to share these recipes from this cookbook. Will be a cookbook that's going to be available hopefully next year for everyone to buy. I think it's going to be open source, so it's not even like buying. We're going to have an open source book. But these recipes are there to share. Now, the recipes are, for me, I wanted to really decolonize the way we think about food and bring it away from like a traditional way. When I say traditional, a traditional Western way of sharing a recipe, which is like 250 grams of this, or, cook for 1 minute. Whereas when the women were cooking, they weren't, apart from one, everybody else cooked in a very non-Western way of cooking. So they cooked, and they said, like, when the onions turn brown, or when you can smell this, or when you can, taste it first and then add a bit more of this in, or I'll keep adding this until this happens, So it was done in that format, and I really wanted to honor that way of cooking. And so I've tried to do that with this. So sharing the recipes, for some people, it might be difficult, but for me, there's an art in this. And the art is that experimenting, like we said earlier on, like you said about the bread making, there is a skill, and you learn that skill over time. And you also adapt it to your own, because sometimes you can live in a region where the water is softer or harder than in other regions.
Or even limited, or even limited water. There's some parts in Palestine where there's no water at all, where, supply of water has been cut off. So they have to kind of improvise on what they've got, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to improvise.
Let's not forget that. I totally resonate with that. I don't measure. I don't use like, oh, you need 2 5 teaspoon of this and that. I just like, that needs a bit more salt. Chuck it in. A bit more oil. Yeah, just pour some more oil.
You look at it and you gauge it. Does it look quite right?
Sense, can't you? You can sense. If you do have that passion in you, and if you do have it in you for cooking, especially, you can just tell. You can just sense, on whether it's right or not, and kind of like balance things out, right? I totally agree with that, and I love that. I love that concept. I guess when it comes to baking, it's slightly different. It has to be quite scientific, because if there's too much water, too much egg, then that cake's not going to happen, kind of thing.
But yeah, so I do want, so in this book, in this full story book, the recipe is a backdrop to connecting culture and sustainability. So the recipe is there to share, but it's not a recipe book. So yes, but the recipes are definitely, the women want to share their recipes and want the world to like taste the food that they've been, cooking and sharing with their families, with the wider communities as well. So yeah, as soon as the book's available, I will let you know.
Yeah, definitely. Good luck with the book. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will sign up to get hold of a copy. So let's go to Q&A now. I just realized, I didn't realize we've talked a lot with each other, which is great always on these live events. So let's go to the Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for us, you think? Katarzyna?
And I also have a question for the audience. So
oh yes, please.
If you want me to ask that, if you can like change the slide, please, Steve, I think to the next one.
I've just seen that there's someone from Jakarta. Are you still with us, Iwan? Because part of my heritage is Indonesian. So Indonesian food is also extremely rich. And I don't know if you know much about Indonesia. It's such a huge country, right? It's almost like sometimes people think we're not in the same part of the world because of the different kind of like races and backgrounds and cultures and heritage. Seriously.
And also just the land spread, because it's like made up of so many different so many different islands,
like my family's from Sumatra Island. So it's all just very different. Our cooking is very different. And if Iwan is from Jakarta still on this, I would love to hear what's the main dish that Iwan looks forward to during Ramadan or post Ramadan or at any point. But carry on, Zarina, sorry.
Yeah. So if you move it on to the next slide as well, please, Steve. I think there's the questions on the next slide. Yeah. So the question is just to the audience that if you were to visualize a fair, sustainable food system, what would that look like for you? What part of our food system would you want to keep and what part would you want to change? What works for you and what doesn't work? If anyone's got any thoughts, please share. Right, for me, I think I love the idea that we're able to have access. I would love to be able to have access to land just to grow. And I'm not green fingered at all, but I just think if we all were able to just be able to grow a little bit of our own food, and not to see food as a commodity. And to be able to share it. So like if I grew like if I was really green fingered and I could grow lots of coriander, but my next door neighbor was very good at potatoes, maybe we could just share.
We've got an answer for you, a feedback.
Yes, please. I'm just curious. It's just a nosy question.
I mean, for me, it's not so much about perhaps it's got something to do with sustainability as well, but also to avoid food waste. One of the things I notice with the younger generation is that they don't like to eat leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be new or fresh, like, oh, was this from last night? Oh, I'm not going to eat that kind of thing. And I think like re-education in that area with the younger generation to say that leftover food, if kept properly, it's fine to eat again. And that way you can save waste, or make a habit of, if you don't finish your food or dishes that you've made, make sure that you can pack it and donate it to the homeless or shelter home. Make it part of a thing that you do. That's just my response to the question.
And it's interesting because like from a Muslim perspective, like food waste is such a big sin that we're not supposed to waste any food, not even grain on your plate, which is really interesting. And it's interesting how different generations see what food waste is, and how like you said, as we become more of a culture where we have everything's much more disposable, even our food is disposable. It's quite alarming. But in our household, we actually cook for the fridge, so that because people come in and out, so there's always an expectation that there is leftovers in the fridge. There's always leftovers in the fridge.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
So you're hearing that supermarket wasting so much fruits and not working for them. I totally agree. We see that. I do know that some supermarket chains are now making the effort to actually channel their food waste, like almost expired food, to either making them selling them at a reduced price or actually sharing them at a local kind of food bank. So that's a new initiative that's come to my attention, and I think we need to encourage that more.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, Syirin, that the only issue with that is that the reason why they are now pushing that is because they get penalized. So because the government put a penalty on them, so if they have food waste, they've got to get rid of it and it costs them more money. So by them giving it off to a charity, they're not having to pay that expense.
Yeah.
Right. But it is thinking about how do we have a fairer food system where we can redistribute food to those that do not have as well. There is that balance. You're right. Totally right.
There's actually so many opportunities, isn't it?
So many opportunities. We don't need to live in a world where we've got food poverty or food.
Yeah. Look, when you talk about the UK, a lot of people forget that there are so many families actually living below poverty line. I know so many kids in my children's schools that rely on free school meals because they don't get food at home. Their family can't afford it. But if food was to be distributed evenly, or there's easier and more affordable access to food, this wouldn't have been a problem, right? And it breaks my heart to know that this is happening right outside my doorstep, Yeah, it's true. Food system is totally unfair, and it's just
Yeah.
it needs to be revisited by the government everywhere around the world. It's not just the UK. But yeah, we're
Yeah.
getting like so many different responses to your question. Allotments right now in such high demand. But again, they should be more accessible. Like you said earlier, you know, if you can get access to a piece of land, just even a small piece of land, so you can grow your own stuff, encourage you to produce your own produce. It's just something that, you know, you would actually want to do, and a lot of us would like to do, and avoid waste and be more sustainable at the same time.
And yeah, and I think like, how do we stop relying on food banks, which has become much more like in the work that I do around food justice, it's just becoming so much more normalized to have food co-ops, have food banks, have food pantries, you know, there's different names for them, soup kitchens. And it's like we shouldn't be living in a world where we have this like tiered food system. We have a very tiered food system for those that have and for those that have not. And for me, food should just be a human right that everybody has.
Exactly.
Simple as that. You know, there's no question about it.
Mhm.
And there's a question there from Hala as well about capturing the food heritage of other faiths and cultures and communities beyond just Muslim traditions. I would love to do that. I would love to be involved in much more research, but I have limited capacity, and I'm sure there are researchers out there that are doing this. And I was talking to somebody from a Jewish background as well, because there's things around like what foods are permissible and what foods are permissible. Like, so if we're like thinking about like cultures and traditions, you know, there are things like and like even thinking about like Ayurvedic food, eating food in an Ayurvedic system, like you don't mix certain foods with other foods because they're not good for your health or your digestive system. You know, there's so much. And then food, there's so many layers to it. So rich. It's such a rich area of like interest and research. So yeah.
Zarina, it's been wonderful speaking to you. I think we're gonna soon be reaching the top of the hour. Do we have one more question? I can see in the Q&A box. Open question. Which foods are best when famine and during famine and drought? Foods.
What was the question? Sorry.
Which foods would be best during a time of famine and drought?
Which foods would be, well, it depends on which area you're living in. Usually dried.
Well, Josie's in the US.
It's usually dried products are very good. So like dried lentils, dried pulses, and because you can store them for a longer time, and then they bulk up when you cook them. So like dried cereals, they're usually good in times of like famine and drought. It's like, yes. So I would say that, and that's known across like history of like, that's why people store dried goods, because they also bulk up when you cook them.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said, we're about to reach the top of the hour. Do you have anything else to add, Zarina?
No, thank you. It's been great chatting to you, and it's been an honor to be able to share this lovely research. And once the book's ready, I'm happy to share the book as well.
What a great job to have, isn't it? To research on food and people's cultures and background. I would love to do that. You know?
I know, I would love it. I would love to be able to do it and take it around the world as well. Like somebody said, like to be able to like do other countries and other faiths and other religions. Yeah, I would love to do that.
There's so many of us, right? There's so many of us. There's no reason why we can't just live in harmony side by side with each other and learn about each other's different like cultures and background, right?
And food really does unite people. It brings people together and it unites. You know, we've got this world of like being very divisive and very me. But when it comes to food, if we just learn to to live in harmony with each other, like you said, our food would be so nice.
Right. Well, it's been awesome speaking to you today and, you know, hearing stories from all these different ladies and, you know, it's St. Patrick's Day today, apparently today. So yes, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody in Ireland or anyone celebrating it today. And thank you for making one of my Ramadan afternoon easy. You know, we're talking about, for chatting to you and talking about all these different women and their history and their backgrounds. It's been really fascinating, you know, it makes me want to learn more. Now I'm going to hand over to Katarzyna, who's managing MACFEST for this event. Thank you, Zarina. Thank you so much. And obviously we'll keep connecting, inshallah.
Thank you so much, ladies. Zarina, thank you for taking time to prepare such a wonderful presentation, for sharing all your findings with us, for including images. Amazing, honestly, thank you. And do let us know when the book is out. We will put the word out on MACFEST social media and in the newsletter. So do join the newsletter if you haven't yet, and follow MACFEST on social media. And yeah, Syirin, thank you for wonderful hosting. I really enjoyed the event. Honestly, I can resonate with the problems with growing. Also, you know, the journey of growing my own food in the garden. That's actually a bigger story when you think about it, because in the garden, it's also the land, and you usually need from 1 to 2 years to know the environment so that you can find the solutions that will be working in that space, in that climate, in that weather, for what you want to grow. So it's a huge subject. Thank you so much for today. And just a quick announcement for our audience. We've got 2 more events coming up, really interesting events. Saturday, 22nd of March, that will be also a Ramadan event. History, culture, art, and food in Iraq. And then on Sunday, 23rd, we've got gastronomy in medieval Baghdad, cooking for pleasure and health, and talking about a book. So do please book your tickets, free tickets on Eventbrite. I mean, most of those events are free, and we rely on the funding. So if you feel generous, do send us donations. We really appreciate your help, and we are enjoying to every year to put a wonderful program for you. And the person that is behind the program and curating and finding all these wonderful people for you is Kesra Shiraz.
Yeah.
So thank you to Kesra and to Steve in
Thanks,
the background. Thank you, guys. See you next weekend.
So goodbye. Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Kareem.